The Killing Sea, Chapter 18. What Sarah could see of Kalan about a mile away on the other side of the destroyed fields filled her with fresh worry. Apart from one white building sticking up like a lone tooth, the town appeared to be mostly rubble. Several big tents had been pitched on one of the hills, and a ramshackle camp of makeshift huts hunkered on the adjoining hill. Several hundred yards away, in a former rice field, an orange excavator lurched and clanked, its scoop bucket digging a large pit in the ground. The sight of that partially reassured Sarah. At least somebody was doing something. The rice field lay beside an asphalt road, which had been cleared to this point, debris bulldozed to the side. A dump truck barreled down the road from the town toward them, trailing a cloud of dust. In the corner of the rice field, a soldier with a rifle slung over his shoulder and a white mask wrapped around his face stood in the shade of a big tree. Paper and plastic from the tsunami still clung to the tree's lowest branches. "Maybe he knows where the doctor is," Sarah said to Ruslan. "Could you ask?" The dump truck turned off onto the rice field. Ruslan and Sarah waited until the dust cloud settled before approaching the soldier. His eyes were shadowed with fatigue, his green uniform streaked with filth. "Salam," Ruslan said respectfully. The soldier grunted a reply, staring at Sarah with eyes too exhausted to show curiosity. Ruslan spoke to him in the local language. The soldier replied, nodding at the hill with the tents. "The clinic is behind the big green tent," Ruslan said. Sarah closed her eyes. "Thank God," she murmured. Aisha shrieked. Startled, Sarah twirled around. Aisha and the others were staring at the truck, which had backed up to the large pit, its dump bed tilted. Dozens of corpses tumbled into the pit, a jumble of bodies, arms and legs sticking out every which way. Smaller bodies of children settled into gaps. Several corpses were stuck on the lip of the truck's bed, blocked by a body in gray overalls that was hung up on something. The driver slammed the truck forward a few feet. This jolted the remaining bodies loose. The corpse and the overalls landed on the edge of the pit. The driver got out of the cab and pushed the body with his feet, rolling it over into the side of the pit. Sarah watched all this because she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Then she threw up on the side of the road. Aisha did the same. The dump truck growled back onto the road. The driver braked to a stop beside Sarah and said something around the roughly rolled cigarette smoldering in his lips. "He's asking if we want to ride," Ruslan interpreted quietly. He looked pale and shaken. Sarah shuddered at the thought. "No thanks, we'll walk." Ruslan asked the driver a question, which the man answered with an indifferent shrug. He drove off with a wave of his cigarette, leaving a stinky smell of diesel exhaust, and underneath that, the sickly sweet smell of death. "He told me they're burying the dead people before everyone else gets sick from disease," Ruslan said. He was quiet for several steps and then added, in a quieter and pained voice, "Nobody's saying the prayers of the dead for them. Nobody will even know who they are." "That's terrible," Sarah murmured. She imagined a father running around frantically looking for his missing son. "Have you seen him? Have you? Where is he? He must be alive. I know he's alive. I must find him." And his son, one of the anonymous dead, buried with 1,000 others. At least Sarah knew for sure her mother was dead, knew where she was temporarily buried. How awful to be able to take comfort in knowing such things. Ruslan swung his arms as though to loosen something off his back. "I thought maybe that dead man in the gray clothes was my father. My brain wanted to explode, but he was too big. Tattoos on his arms. And my father is an MMA." Imagine that, happy that someone else's dead father, wasn't one's own. But Sarah knew that she would feel the same. Perfectly understandable. They came to the foot of the first big hill. Down the road, in one section of the flattened town, Sarah could see men with scarves around their faces and plastic bags around their hands picking through the wreckage, hauling corpses to the dump truck. On the hill, 2 soldiers emerged from a guard post of broken planks roughly nailed together and sauntered down to the band. They spoke with Baba and Ruslan. There were a few minutes of argument and confusion. It was clear from the soldiers gesturing that the men in the band were to immediately go to work helping gather corpses, while the women were to go up to the camp on the adjacent hill. On its upper slopes was a clutch of huts made of salvaged cardboard, plastic, plywood, tin. Ruslan argued politely and firmly, pointing to Peter. In the end, the twins weren't allowed to carry the stretcher to the clinic. Sarah and Ruslan had to do it themselves. One of the soldiers herded Aisha and the other women away before Sarah even had the chance to thank them. The collection of tents had been hastily erected on the dusty slope between stands of scraggly trees and brush. One stiff wind would probably blow the tents away. Sarah noticed a big green tent with a wooden sign up front that had a military-looking shield painted on it. Stern black letters announced the tent to be a command post of some kind. A man in civilian clothes, his hair cut flat to his scalp, stood in front of the flap door, brooding over the ruined town. He swung his hooded gaze to Ruslan and Sarah, carrying the stretcher. Ruslan at the front picked up the pace. When they turned the corner, Sarah whispered, "Who was that?" "I don't know," Ruslan said shortly. The brown clinic tent, with Red Cross and Red Crescent signs painted on the thin canvas, tilted to one side as though a breeze had already tried to snatch it. The front desk at the clear plastic doorway looked as though it had been scavenged from a grade school. Behind it sat a young man in army trousers and a dirty t-shirt. He shook his head and said something. Sarah guessed he was saying that there was no more room. Ruslan spoke quickly. Sarah caught the word tourist and tamu, a local word that she knew meant guest. The man sighed and waved them inside. "We'll have to find room for Peter," Ruslan said to Sarah. 24 cots and another dozen makeshift ones crammed the hot tent. Patients lay on them in dull apathy. Many had broken bones, but only several of these bones had been set with plaster. The other limbs had been set with sticks and tape or simply wrapped in cloth. A number of patients were children like Peter, and like him, many were feverish and coughing. Ruslan found a space in the back of the tent beneath an open flap that caught a draft of breeze. They put down the stretcher. Peter moaned and opened his eyes. "Where are we? It's hot." After a racking cough, he peered up at the slope of canvas above him, propped up by large aluminum poles. "What's that? Why is there something over my head?" Sarah knelt by him. "It's a tent, silly. We're in a clinic, and here comes a nurse." The dark circles under the nurse's eyes looked like they were etched onto her cheekbones. She asked for Peter's name and age, which she wrote down with a pencil stub in a ragged notebook. She took his temperature with an old-fashioned mercury thermometer and felt his pulse, which she noted. "Where's the doctor?" Sarah asked. The nurse shook her head in irritation. Ruslan repeated the question in the local language. The nurse snapped at him. Ruslan said to Sarah, "He's worked for 48 hours straight, and he's having a rest. He'll be here soon." The nurse gave Ruslan an enamel basin half filled with murky water and a cloth. Sarah dipped the cloth and washed Ruslan's dirty chest, his ribs starting to stand out like toothpicks. She was losing weight herself. Before, her shorts had pinched a little. Now they hung on her hips. On the truck early that morning, she found some rope and made a belt for them. Maybe when she got home, she could write a diet book. Take one tsunami, add coconuts. She could hear her mother. "Nothing to joke about." True. She washed Peter's cheeks and became aware of Ruslan's gaze. He was watching her with an odd intensity that flustered her. "What?" she said lightly. "Am I drooling or something?" "Peter is very lucky to have a sister like you." She could feel pink spots blossom on her cheeks. The last time she felt displeased was when her dad had complimented her on her parallel parking. He'd been teaching her in the family car. Just a month ago, back in her other life, before the ocean had destroyed it. What had he said? "A girl who can parallel park like that can go places in life. Why, just think, you could even be a garage's chief parking attendant." She had given him a mock scowl and punched his shoulder, and was smiling now at the memory. But the truth about her and Peter was unavoidable. Her smile died. "I haven't really been much of a great sister. We could fight. I could be mean." She looked at Ruslan, at his soft black eyes. They drew something out of her she'd never ever spoken about, not even to her dad. "My mother loved Peter a lot more than me." Ruslan shook his head. "I never had a mother, but still, I think mothers are mothers. They love their children all the same." "In theory, not in reality. My mother never wanted me. I was a mistake, a pregnancy at the wrong time." Sarah dipped her cloth into the bowl. "My mother's the last thing she did, just as the tsunami was starting to come in, she slapped me across the face and yelled at me to help Peter instead of my dad with his broken leg." She could still feel the blow, could see her mother's icy look. She squeezed the cloth hard, emotions whirled in her like a slot machine gone crazy. Then they came to an instant stop, but all mixed up and unreadable. Tears sprang to her eyes. "Peter would have been okay," she said. The words came out hot and hard, burning her throat. "He was running. I could have helped Mom get Dad up the hill in time. We would have all been okay." She hurled the cloth, not seeing the man sidling toward them through the cots. The cloth smacked him in the face. He picked it off and dropped it to the side. It was the man from the green tent. His yellowed eyes were as cold as dirty ice cubes. He pointed a finger at her. "You," he said, the simple English word heavily accented. "Come with me."